If you love an unusual technique and like a little bit of jeopardy with your painting, you're going to love this. It's ink resist, and we use gouache and Indian ink to produce an image that is a little bit like a woodblock print. You've got to follow the sequence, but at the end we get this amazing reveal that shows what all our hard work has been for. You'll need some watercolour paper that can withstand a bit of abuse, some water-soluble gouache, acrylic gouache won't do, and some waterproof Indian ink. My name's Liz Chatterton. I'm a watercolour artist based in Berkshire, and I love this technique. I'll take you through it step by step. I started out by sketching my design onto £140 watercolour paper. I'm using hot press, but you can use hot press or cold press, entirely up to you. If you want to do these sunflowers, I've put a photo over on the post section of this YouTube channel. Please feel free to use it. I'm just using 3 colours to paint this, and I've done the background flat blue. Just going to touch this bit up because I may have been a little thin with the paint. Paint needs to be thick enough to resist the ink, thin enough to give interesting marks. And effectively what I'm doing is negative painting. Anything I leave white is going to end up black. Anything I paint is going to end up a paler shade of that colour. Just to keep some harmony, I am going to mix up various shades of green. I've got this yellow ochre, which will give quite a gungy green. I've got this brighter yellow, which will give, bizarrely enough, a brighter green. In my head, what I want this to be is that the leaves and the flowers are going to look a bit more nuanced, and the background is going to be quite plain. Let me explain the principle to you. Any way you paint, that paper will become a paler shade of the colour you're putting on. If you leave little blank spaces, like I'm leaving the lines here in the stem, the ink will be able to grip onto that paper and it'll be black. But the ink cannot grip where the paint is. That's why it's called a resist. We're going to wash away lots of that gouache and it'll take the excess ink with it. So it just takes a little bit of time to get your head around this whole idea of leaving white lines where you want black lines. If I want anything to be white on this, actually I don't, but if I did, I'd actually have to paint it white, because this is all about resisting the ink. I'll carry on with the green and come back when we move on to the flowers. Let's move on to the sunflowers themselves. I'm going to try and introduce texture by actually stippling in the middle so that the black ink will make them darker. I would always suggest testing out your colours before you start. So the bright yellow I've got here washed out to this yellow, the yellow ochre washed out to this. So I'm going to mix some of them up and use lots of different yellows, but I'm going to veer off to more, I think, the yellow ochre in places. Sorry, my camera seems to have gone slightly out of focus here, so we'll keep it brief. But I'm doing the petals at this point, and I want some of them to have black edges and to have a few black lines within them. So basically I am negatively painting around where I want the black lines. I find a flat brush is easiest to use with gouache because it's quite thick and we are using it pretty much undiluted, but sometimes you've got to use a smaller round brush for a bit of detail. Do add a little bit of water to make your gouache workable, but if you over thin it, it won't resist that ink. Hold your work up to the light when you've finished, and if the light's coming through the paint, it's probably not thick enough. If you're interested, I've got a full step-by-step course over at lizchattertonstudio.co.uk, and I've done a landscape one and also a rather lovely turtle one. In those courses, I'll take you through step by step, and I'll also show you what to do if those things go a bit wrong. I've got so much more time to be able to show you everything in detail over there. So let me carry on with this painting and we'll come back when I get to the centres. So there, the petals are all in place. Now, what I'm planning to do is using stippling brush is to make texture in the middle. And I think the secret of this working is going to be how much white I leave, because that will be black. Also, I need to make sure the brush turns around so I don't get too regular a pattern. Sorry, the good thing is if there's too much colour at the end, we could always touch it up with a bit of black. But if there's too much black, you can't take it off. I told you it would look like a paint by numbers done by a child, but honestly, please trust the process. When you think you're finished, just look twice and check those edges, because if they're jagged, they'll look really messy on the final painting. I'd hold your work up to the light as well and just make sure that the paint is thick enough to resist. If light can get through, maybe so can the ink. This is a physical barrier. This now needs to dry fully, because if it's even slightly damp when we put the ink on top, it'll dissolve into the ink and all will be ruined. Quite often I leave it overnight, but given the warmth today, I think this will be dry in probably an hour or two. This is the fun and rather bonkers bit of this whole process. I have got waterproof Indian ink here and a flat brush I don't mind using ink with, and we are going to totally cover our work in ink. Your gouache is water soluble. The ink has to be waterproof, because when this dissolves, it's going to take away the excess. And I like to think of the ink as almost being like the grout. When you've tiled something, it might look a bit of a mess, but you put the grout on and it brings it all together. And the ink is just like that. And I'm trying to only do one layer, because if you go backwards and forwards, you may dissolve or muddle up the gouache underneath. I did straight round the edges, because if any brush marks come through, they'll be in the right direction. But on the flowers themselves, I'm doing short strokes in different directions. It's just sometimes I find that the edges of marks can be a bit wetter than the middles, and they sometimes sort of soak through. There, that is bonkers, isn't it? All that work gone. Now is the fun part. It's dry and we need either running water. I'm just in the kitchen, I've got the tap here, or you could use a washing up bowl if you're trying to save water. Just change the water regularly if you're doing it in a bowl. And we start running the water, just cold water, over the top, and we can start to give a gentle tickle with a brush. And oh, can you see what happens basically is that the gouache starts to dissolve and it takes all the excess ink with it. It leaves a stain behind because the gouache stains the paper, but all the places where you left the paper blank is now black. And what I love about it, it also just stays in random places. So can you see what originally looked like our painting by numbers painting is now starting to actually look really rather gorgeous. How much you take off is up to you. The more you scrub to get bits of the black off, the more the colour will go as well. So it's a balance of how much I want to take off more here, loving how those centres have come out, just what I was hoping for. Need to take a bit more off here, there, there. So I'm lying it flat. You won't be able to see this. It's just so I can give that a bit more of a scrub in limited places. And this is why you need a good quality paper, because we are soaking it. Ah, good. That bit came off as well. Because the more you scrub, the paler it will get. And when you're happy with that, I would blot it in case there's any loose colour, and we don't want that sort of leaching out. And then we're going to let that dry and see whether it needs some touching up. But isn't that a transformation? I've let this dry absolutely thoroughly, and I really love how it's turned out. I love the spontaneity of the marks that this process gives us. I like the slight chaos. There are a couple of areas though that I'm not happy with. For example, here, it looks a bit grubby because I obviously scrubbed a little bit hard there to try and get this dark mark off that wasn't coming. Sometimes if you haven't put the paint on thick enough, the ink gets through, it bonds with the paper, you can't get it off. I would urge you not to over fiddle any touch-ups, simply because the charm of this process and going through what is quite an awkward process on occasions is that you get this spontaneity, and if you try and do too much, you're going to lose it. So we've touched up a teeny bit of ink. We can do exactly the same with a teeny bit of colour should we wish to. And I do simply because this behind here is meant to be green and it was looking very yellow. But again, just go careful. If you're going to touch up the colour, use very transparent watercolour. Don't use your gouache because that is opaque and will just sit on top of the lines and obscure them. So very transparent watercolour if you need to top anything up. Remember that this paper's been through a lot. It's been scrubbed underwater, you've removed the sizing, that's the surface treatment, so it may not behave quite in the way you expect it to. This leaf I found to be a bit stripy, so I am just going to put a very gentle wash just to sort of unify. I mean, it's hardly anything. It's just going to slightly unify this leaf, I hope. But the washed out vintage colours you get, again, is part of the charm. So we're not trying to sort of, what's the word? Really overly control this. What I would like to do, and I've got a little bit of quinacridone gold, is just brighten up a few of the petals to bring them forwards a little. It's far better to do too little rather than too much, because you can always do a little bit more, but taking it away is really tough. If you don't like chaos and surprise, this technique really isn't for you. But if you like a loose, spontaneous, really interesting mark, then you are going to love this. I hope you love as much as I do the sort of strict rules of this technique that are then followed by that moment of jeopardy as you put all the ink all over it, and the spontaneity of the final design. I've done landscapes, portraits, animal portraits, all sorts. So it's really versatile, and I hope you have a whole pile of fun with it.